I like seeing games that do that carry story elements over from the previous and build upon them and continue to do so, especially in a military shooter like that, because it gives me context as to what the hell it is I'm doing, okay? Why am I at this military base? Why do I want to take these flags? What's going to happen after this multiplayer match that, is supposedly tied into the story, say what's supposed to happen when one side wins? What's supposed to happen when the other side wins? 2042 doesn't really do that. 2042 is just kind of like, here's a sandbox. We're gonna dump 120 some players into it. Just go kill each other, and there's kind of some subtle touches being thrown around here. If you look at a Modern Warfare 3 map, which I'm sure there's a couple of them that are actually set in New York, you can have a context as to what's going on. You're on the Americans. You're repelling a Russian invasion. You're the Russians. You're trying to invade America. Cut and dry. Period. Point blank. End of story. We could point at Battlefield 4 map. Siege of Shanghai. America's trying to invade Shanghai. The Chinese are trying to repel them. It's cut and dry. It's simple. It exists. Now you look at 2042. They give you a little blurb as far as what's supposed to be going on in the beginning.
The way I see Battlefield 2042 story is like nonsensical to me. Like, I get the idea, okay, the world is went to shit, global warming, satellites, some stuff. Okay, cool, you gave me some context. But at the end of the day,
it just feels like salt on a shitty dish.
Yeah, to me it just feels like, okay, so we have USA and Russia. Okay, what about other countries? What's this? Just because what's the point of politics if we literally have two superpowers just fighting each other? Like, what's the point? Like,
well, hang on, because if you paid attention to the quote unquote story of Battlefield 2042, supposedly a lot of smaller countries folded and merged with the larger countries. So that kind of gives you the context of where the fuck everybody else is. It's very lazily done.
I have no idea what that. Yeah, I have no idea what that came from. I have no idea, because for me, I'm just thinking, okay, so what happened to other nations? What happens to the African nations? Do they rose to becoming more powerful?
Stomping
because
through
more
fucking Egypt. Where's the Egyptian army?
Yeah, where's the Egyptian army? All the refugees from Europe and so on coming to Africa, maybe making those nations stronger, because it's not just refugees, it's just like people with multiple talents and education, all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying African countries are less educated, but the way the economics work in Africa right now is very rough.
The part that irritates me the most about 2142 story is the concept of this. You're a soldier without borders. Okay, that's kind of nifty. But the way it explains your ability in order to just randomly go from one side to the other is just like, oh, well, you're a free merc. You go where you're needed. And it's like, does my character not have a stand on the conflict? Or we just fucking hired guns? Is that all this is?
It's not even that. In the game or story, whatever, I don't know, the story, whatever you want to call it.
The quote-unquote story.
Yeah, the quote-unquote story. They say that NOPADS is like a formidable military group, So I'm like, okay, are we talking about like a nation strong? Or
private military corporation, just a band of,
yeah, that confuses me. Like, they never explained, and I understand why they never explained, because...
Is this a military sans frontiers type deal? Like, we're ripping off Metal Gear Solid 5 in a way? Because that's what my first thought was. Is, okay, we're fighting for a group, we're fighting with a group of soldiers, we're in a group of soldiers who are basically MSF, military sans frontiers, soldiers without borders, soldiers without a country. Is that what it was? And then it was like, well, now you're fighting for this side or this side. And it's like, okay, so now you're telling me that the organization that I'm a part of doesn't take a stand on either side of this conflict. As much as in the beginning, some of the cinematics and everything that they were playing leading up to it, it made you feel like, oh, well, you're fighting for good and you're trying to keep humanity alive. And it's like, okay, so we're going to do this by fighting for either side at any given time, depending upon what's convenient for us. That's not doing anything. That's being chaotic neutral. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, so that's my gripe with 2042 story. Question is,
I really wish they would have just solidified that a lot more. Like, I'll harp on this again. They had a prime opportunity. Now, again, because Michael passed away, they kind of lost their ability to do this. But they could have done some clever writing and said that Irish passed away in a conflict or something like that. They could have done something to explain Michael's absence throughout this. There was no reason they couldn't have done, like, short form, 2.5, 3-minute CGI films to give more context to this story. And it wouldn't surprise me if they were planning it, and maybe Michael's death is what stopped that from happening, but it shouldn't have been the excuse in order to stop. They could have kept building on that. They could have hammered out the fine details and given us more reason to be involved other than just new guns, new skins, new stuff, no context, just buy. And I don't like that. That's lazy to me.
Yeah, that's my criticism with the new Call of Duties that came out. Not Modern Warfare 2.19. I think they kind of thread that nicely. But with this new one that they came out just 8 months ago or something like that, yeah, I am not a fan because it's like Fortnite in a sense, but it works in Fortnite. In Fortnite, it's all about
Yeah, but
it's a
Fortnite's not very
sandbox.
grounded in reality, period. It's
Yeah,
just
it's
kind of
a
like
sa-
this alternate dimension that exists where crazy shit happens and all of the
Yeah.
IPs of the world exist and coexist. I mean, for God's sakes, we got fucking, Marvel superheroes and fucking, Star Wars characters in the same universe. So, I mean,
So it makes
Fortnite's
sense.
its own flavor.
It makes sense in Fortnite with all your collabs and everything, all that kind of stuff. And then you have Modern Warfare 2 that is trying to do collabs, again, the boys.
Which I don't agree with. I don't think that's something that this seems like something that's shoehorned in my honest opinion, because I've watched all the trailers on it and everything, and it's just like, and I am a big fan of the Boys TV show. I adore that show. I mean, we're getting into the third season now. Jensen Ackles finally showed up, so I mean, it's for them in order to choose those three characters. It's kind of like, I'm going to say this now, and I don't care who gets butthurt over it. Starlight has no goddamn place in that game whatsoever. It should have been Black Noir, Homelander, and fucking Soldier Boy, period. Those three should have been the ones. And the fact that they shoehorned Starlight in like this was just an excuse for me, in my honest opinion, to sell gold, shiny, and white guns.
Yeah, so that's my criticism with the new Call of Duty. With Modern Warfare 2. It's basically just collabs, but collabs don't make any fucking sense in the
You're not getting
premise
any
of the game.
context to it. What the fuck? What are they doing here? Now you're telling me that Call of Duty exists in the same universe as the Boys? Is that what's fucking going on here? Has this always been a thing?
And the funny thing is, so they have a co-op experience in Call of Duty, right? And it's basically, and those co-op experiences, they call them Rays. We finished 3 of them, and the 4th one just came out, because they come out every season. And it's basically a co-op experience with 3 people, so you and 2 friends, and you go into this mission, which is about an hour or 2 hours long, depending how quick you are, or how fast you are, and so on. Yeah, it's called a raid. So, and it's basically a continuation of the single player. So the story continues. It's the whole story. It's basically a story mode, a co-op story mode, that continues the single player story. And it does really well regarding, expanding the story. It remains grounded.
It's building upon the premise that was already laid there and explaining and giving the player more context as far as what's going on, which is good. Even if it's not done great, it's still an effort in order to try and world build. If Battlefield 4 would have done something similar, like let's say, when the Naval Strike maps came out, let's say they would have said, okay, well, not only are we going to do the Naval Strike maps, but we're going to take those same maps because there's ways that we could break these maps down to make them quote-unquote single-player maps. And don't fucking tell me that there's not. You actually look at the Naval Strike maps. There's ways in order to go about it. They could have said, okay, well, we're not only are we going to do multiplayer maps on these maps, there's going to be a 1 or 2 mission single-player campaign on a couple of these maps that are co-op or they're just strict single-player in order to give the player more context as far as what's going on. Now, imagine if they would have done that with every DLC. If they would have done, even 1 or 2 missions. That's it. They're just enough to give context as to what's going on in the maps. They would have done 2 missions for Naval Strike. A mission or 2 for Final Stand. Done a couple of missions for, hell, even do a mission that would have explained, the community map project. Try and tie that in some way. That would have gone over very well. I would have applauded the shit out of that back in the day. That would have built on what was going on and helped flesh out the Battlefield 4 storyline more. And I'm not saying that DICE didn't want to do that, because I heard a couple of, softball rumors floating around that that's what they kind of wanted in order to do, but they just never did it on account of, I guess, either bug fixes, budget, or a combination of those two elements. Probably budget mostly. But it would have been great, if in spite of, they would have just done these things. And this is the thing that makes me sad about game development these days. It's not. You go back to a lot of your older games, a lot of your older DLC packs. Developers and producers would go all out to try and get you enticed in order to buy. Expanding storyline, expanding mechanics, adding mechanics, fixing things. There were reasons for you to get invested in DLC back then. You get to Battlefield 4, and it's kind of just like more maps to shoot people on. That's it. No context. And I have to find the context as to what the fuck is going on. To me, that's not right.
It's funny. They actually start... So since this last season came out for 2042, they started adding like quotes from the specialist in the loading screens, which is a neat idea, but again, I don't care because I don't know what's the context of the, what's the war about,
What the fuck is going on outside of this bubble that I'm stuck in right now?
Exactly. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, you tell me like a bit of backstory about the characters. Cool. I don't care about them because I don't know what's going on,
And that right there should tell somebody who's in storyboard writing and who's in production that, hey, players do care about this stuff. I can't count how many times over the last 10 years alone I have heard, quite frankly, arrogant and stupid CEOs and design leads say this: nobody cares about single-player story, nobody cares about context anymore, therefore it is not an investment. Bullshit! Bullshit.
It is bullshit.
It's all bullshit. It is an excuse, and I hate saying shit like this because it's part of me feels it's not 100% true, but there's that cynical part of me that knows how this industry works and knows for a fucking fact this is how it is. It comes down to money. If they look at an idea and somebody sits in that room and goes, "Well, we're only going to make this much money off of it," the fucking idea doesn't happen. And that idea goes, and that philosophy goes through every goddamn facet of manufacturing and production. I don't care what industry it is. Pick an industry. Things don't happen unless somebody's going to make some fucking money off of it, period. We don't have a cure for cancer right now because nobody's going to get fucking rich off of it.
It kind of pisses me off how game developers, not Battlefield only, but like
developers
in general sometimes. In general, publishers, whatever, when you release your AAA shooter, whatever, they don't really like understand like, no, I'm sorry, you do need to care about the premise, about the story, all that kind of stuff, because people care about the context, because context makes us feel more interested and more invested in our game.
And without it, it's just mindless gameplay with no context. And that doesn't entice, in most players, it doesn't give them a reason in order to stick around. They want to know, well, why are they abandoning modern shooters after 6 to 8 months? We're giving them all the content and all this extra stuff and stuff to buy in the world. Well, the problem is it's not, that you're giving them something to buy. You're not getting them emotionally involved in it. You're not getting them invested in your game other than monetary and time. That's it.
Yeah, and the only way people can get invested into open sandbox like that is when you make your own stories. So, let's go back to Call of Duty Warzone, like the one that came out in 2020. Was there like they had some like, what's the word, basic story, what's happening, right? They did explain the trailers and the Battle Pass trailers and so on, like what's the context here, right? They explained a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's mostly the players were making their own stories because it was a battle royale. They had their own, like, oh, I did that and that and that, we won that and that. Like, it just depends if you have the tools to make your own story in the game, and suddenly you can put your own context into the story and the premise of the game and your immersion and so on. With Battlefield, for example, we have two sides fighting for each other, but I don't feel anything. Yeah, why? I don't feel anything. Yeah,
I'll put it this way. You remember when Metal Gear Solid 4 was announced? Because we were hanging out and no, it wasn't Metal Gear Solid 4. It was
5 maybe.
5, yeah. When 5 was announced, you remember how fucking stoked I was when that was announced and I found out what time frame that they were actually putting that game in as far as the Metal Gear Solid storyline,
yeah,
like right in between.
And
Metal Gear Solid story is very convoluted and there are some things that don't exactly fit with other games. But here's the deal. I have been a fan of Metal Gear since Metal Gear Solid 1 on the PlayStation. It's one of the very first games that I got really into when I was a kid. With a game having an immature rating, I'm sure there's some people out there going, "Oh my God, you were playing shooters as a fucking 13-year-old? What's wrong?" Yeah, shut up. I'm a regular American. We grew up with that crap. Anyway, I started getting invested with Metal Gear Solid 1. When Metal Gear Solid 2 came out, I was so fucking excited because it was like, okay, I got involved with the story and involved with the characters in Metal Gear Solid 1. Metal Gear Solid 2 is coming out, and now it is a continuation of that story. And then Metal Gear Solid 3 came out, and it was like, now we're going back into the past in order to find out Big Boss's history. You're still world building. Even though you're jumping across timelines all over the place, you're still world building. I'm getting more and more invested in these characters. I'm getting more and more invested in this world. I want to know what made this world the way that it is. I want to know the precursor stuff. And then Metal Gear Solid 4 came out, which was a successor to Metal Gear Solid 2. So now I have background context as far as Big Boss goes from Metal Gear Solid 3, and now I'm playing Metal Gear Solid 4, which is now building on the storyline from Metal Gear Solid 1 and Metal Gear Solid 2, which in of itself had a lot of fan service to it. Callbacks. You go back to Shadow Moses. To this fucking day, when I fire up Metal Gear Solid 4 and I go to the Shadow Moses maps, I am moved to fucking tears. Because it's the nostalgia, it's the fan service, it's seeing something that I've been to before, and I'm going back to it, and I'm getting more emotionally invested in it, and I'm learning more details about what happened the last time I was there. That's brilliant. Metal Gear Solid 5 came out, and now this is the game that precedes that is in between Metal Gear Solid 3 and the SNES games. The original Metal Gear games. Now you're learning about what happened between the time of Big Boss's quote-unquote downfall at the end of Metal Gear Solid 3, and you're every time Kojima put out another one of those games, he kept building and building and building. Now, knowing aside, Hideo Kojima is a very fucking talented storyteller, period. I don't care who you are. The man is, he's a little fucking crazy in some cases, but he is a very solid storyteller. You can't argue that fact. If Battlefield would have done something similar, something close. Instead of now we have Battlefield 3, we have a precursor to the conflict, some things that happened beforehand, the stolen nukes and all that other stuff. Now we move into Battlefield 4, where that situation has now escalated. This is after the Paris attack. We're acknowledging that Paris fucking happened. Hey, you go to Metro, what's there? The goddamned hole in the ground from the fucking nuke, the destroyed area. They did that very subtly. And then when it came to 2042, it was just like, bah, we're not going to do that. We're just going to throw maps out there with a little quip of a story, and that's all you get, kids. Good luck. Go find your own context.
Okay, I have my complaints. So, Battlefield 3, right? We have one single story from A to B. That's our story. That's what happened. It explains the premise, what's happening, stolen nukes, Russia tried to get those nukes back, no one's really want a war. And
there was a third party that was actually involved with the whole thing that was unknown by the major powers, and now his actions have caused a world war within of itself, which is funny because that's the exact goddamn premise for fucking Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2.
Okay, so 3, that was the story. Battlefield 4 was supposed to be a continuation of that story, which is fine. They kind of did, but at the same time, not really. So there was some tidbits of previous stuff that happened, but entirely they're not really connected, other than some tiny bits and there and there. And it was never really explained why we're fighting Russians, why they're aligning with the China and so on, and I get that, but there was missing context, missing piece of important information why it's happening.
Basically, what happened was they gave you a puzzle, they gave you all of the pieces, but you have no overall picture to see how that puzzle is supposed to go together.
Yes.
You're supposed to just assume what it looks like when it's done.
Yeah, and then you mentioned Battlefield 2042, which is basically a sequel to Battlefield 4, which is fine. Again, I love returning characters.
We wanted that.
We wanted that, yes, exactly. So that was a good decision, but again, because we don't know the context, we don't know what nations are fighting and what. No paths make no sense to this day.
We have no reason to be invested long term, period.
Yeah.
Other than what we pay in for it.
Yeah, so just because you added some certain characters back doesn't make me more invested whatsoever. And that's what Battlefield always annoyed me. And people, I see it in other fandoms. I see it in Marvel. I see it in DC.
Oh my God! Yeah, I was just about to bring that up. I was just about to sit here and be like, "Listen, let's look at this from another entertainment media. Let's look at the MCU. If the MCU did not have..."
Before you continue, just gonna finish this, so I don't forget. Basically, what I am annoyed most about is the little details. Like the railgun, for example. It was in Battlefield 4, and we have it in Battlefield 2042.
And it's
a sequel.
updated.
It's updated and everything, but it's not the same. It doesn't feel the same. It doesn't, like, there's missing pieces that were supposed to be there but not there. It make no freaking sense to me. So, and it happens with Marvel, like, oh, why certain character was doing that or had that, but he doesn't have it in the next movie or whatever the case may be. Like, small details, really small details. And I don't think people realize, working on these games or these shows or whatever, like, some people, I remember reading, like, really interesting comments from directors and so on, and movie producers saying, we want to tell a story, our story, you know? We don't want to focus on something else that happened. Bruh, if you're making something in that universe, you know, whether it be Star Wars, Marvel, whatever,
you have to have consistency.
Yes. Ryan Johnson for episode 3. Who gives a damn about the past? Here's my fucking story, even though it's still in the same universe. No, if you're making a movie in the same universe, you need to make it connected. Make your own story.
Yeah, definitely. Let's
make it
even
connected.
Look at Star Wars. Imagine how much of a clusterfuck that series would have been. Okay, now when George Lucas started out, you know, he made I remember seeing some older interviews that he wanted to start with part 1. But he couldn't tell that story because of technological limits and everything like that. So he proceeded to move and tell the middle of the story first. Now, imagine how fucked Star Wars would be, okay? If George Lucas made those middle 3 movies, they did as well as they did, and then they went back and did the prequels, and not a goddamn element from the prequels. I mean, midichlorians put aside. Let's not dig into that fucking hole right now.
I think I don't mind midichlorians. I think it's just a scientific explanation.
Yeah, it's just an explanation, and it's really not really one in order to take home anything for. It's just kind of like a haha, here it is. Just like Metal Gear Solid does with nanomachines. Why does this happen? Fucking nanomachines, duh. But anyway, now imagine what would have happened if they would have done those first 3 movies, and not a goddamn thing that happened in any of those 3 movies made any fucking sense or connected at all to the other 3 episodes, the original 3, quote unquote. Imagine how much of a clusterfuck that story would be. Now, if you pay attention to the prequels as much as people want to shit on them, they were very well done. There were a lot of elements that happened in those 3 movies that explains why things are the way that they are in A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and in Return of the Jedi. Now, what happened with the sequel trilogy is, and here is the prime example of why consistency is king in storytelling. You got 3 fucking movies that barely tie with anything other than the fact that the fucking characters exist. There's no callback to anything that happened in any of the previous 6 movies, period, other than Anakin Skywalker was a thing. That's it. That's really the only hard callback. And, Palpatine somehow survived all these fucking years. Which I haven't even seen the 3rd movie, and I'm fucking shitting on it.
Oh, you're not missing much. Trust me.
I know I'm not.
Saw that. Oh, I seen it in the cinema, and oh my god, that was
I remember how pissed off you were when you came home from that, and I was like,
I was
wow.
So pissed.
But, that is a prime example. Battlefield did the exact same fucking thing with 2042. They threw that game out and went, here's some plucky details that you can kind of connect with Battlefield 3 and 4, but we're not going to confirm them. We're going to leave that up to your imagination. Instead, we're just going to give you more places and more guns to go shoot people with and go shoot people on. I'm not invested in that. I get invested in Star Wars because it's a grand overall arcing story. And as far as I'm concerned, that fucking series ends with Return of the Jedi. I don't give a fuck what anybody says. Anyway, Star Trek. Star Trek did it really fucking well with Picard Season 3. If you haven't seen Picard Season 3, fucking skip the first 2 seasons. You don't even need to. Watch the fucking 3rd season and how much connects with the Next Generation, with the original television show. And see how well they fucking did that. And there's a reason why the fan base says, fucking watch just the 3rd season. Strange New Worlds does a really good job with it. I mean, there are franchises, there are entities that are out there that are doing this very well, and they're doing very well, and they're continuing to appease their fan base and do very well. You look at 2042 and how hard that's fallen. I firmly believe a lot of the reason why the community hasn't stuck around and stuck with it, it's a lack of engagement, period. You're not engaging your audience. You're not engaging their brains. The only thing you're doing is engaging their wallets, their thumbs, and their FOMO. That's it. And that only holds somebody's attention for so long.
Yeah, and that's why I'm really annoyed about this. Just the little details. For example, like a perfect example, like again going back on COD, in the 219 Modern Warfare, for example, a soldier, like when you call a kill streak, right? You put a hand on your radio and you call it in, right? It was like a simple hand movement. There was no fancy tech or anything. It was just a radio on your shoulder.
Yep.
And you press it, you call it UAV. Then in the second game, when you want to call a kill streak, you have this fancy futuristic tablet with really nice fancy graphics.
And you gotta press like 6 different buttons, and it's like, fuck, I'm in a firefight. Just get this goddamn thing rolling.
But it's not even that. Like the point I'm trying to say is like, it's not important. It's still the same function, still same game mechanic. But because you whip out a futuristic tablet comparing to a small average radio that you always use in military, like what the fuck happened in those 2 years that your soldiers are equipped with the futuristic tablets that you can call in a kill streak? It's not a big deal, but little details like that do matter. So we're going back on Battlefield 2042. The railgun, right? Why is it so bloody different from the original? Sure, you can say a prototype, but is it that type of prototype? Like, it functions completely differently, looks completely different. It's nothing alike like it was the original one, and it's like people don't really maybe not notice straight away, but subconsciously people do notice that something is different, something's not right. And that's why I think it's really important to have someone somewhere in the writings team or a game design team, whatever, just to make sure that your details connect. You know, someone needs to be there. Well, no, we can't have that because we have that. And if you want to have that, make sure that it's connected to that old thing.
The other thing is the easiest way to make this happen is again, and I look back at Star Wars. The reason why those 6 movies worked well together is because George Lucas, there was one mind that was in charge of the whole entire story of it. You look at the other 3 and how little Lucas had his fingers in on it and how crazily just bad those movies are. That's a prime example of not only consistency in storytelling, but consistency in the person who's telling the story. I'm all for team collaboration work. I really am. But there still has to be, at the top of any kind of story development, the one voice, the one brain who can stop and look at everything all tied together and say, yes, this is going to work. No, this is not going to work. Hey, wait a minute. You forgot this event. You forgot this event. That's a good idea, but it doesn't play. It contradicts this. It doesn't work with this, etc., etc. You have to have that one brain at the lead that is saying what can and cannot be canon. Another example, again, Metal Gear, Hideo Kojima. You know, he was at the forefront of writing and storytelling. He was the lead writer, the lead director, period. One director made sure that an entire overall story arc made sense and was all tied together perfectly well. How much money do you want to bet that Battlefield, between games, very seldom had the same exact people working on the storyline? And that might be a very rational explanation as to why 2042 is the way that it is. Because a lot of we know a lot of the people that worked on Battlefield 4, they're not there anymore. We knew this. They were gone after what? Battlefield 5 was halfway done. Yeah. They started leaving. So to see 2042's storyline in the state that it is, it saddens me. But on the aspect of that it's not the same storyteller, it doesn't surprise me. That is just as equally important. You have to have the consistent storyteller. It doesn't necessarily always have to be the same person, but they have to be of the same mindset. Star Wars, the latest 3 Star Wars movies, directors flat out said it. I don't give a damn what happened in the other movies, and it shows blatantly. Yeah. Some probably did the same with 2042. I don't care what really happened in Battlefield 4, and it shows.
And that's a thing for the leadership who I was running, producing these games. They should be responsible. Make sure, okay, if you don't have the same people, continuing the story, that's fine. But you need to have some sort of database or something, some sort of guideline of what happened.
Storyline tree, a consistent storyline tree, period, that's there for that game. There had to have been a digital file somewhere of a timeline of events so that, the storytellers could stay consistent with this. And if they didn't do that, then that's just poor organization.